www.dd-wrt.com directory, and we're going to click on Router Database. It says what router, please enter at least 3 characters of the router name, WRT54G. And here's the various selections we have to choose from. Here's our version 8.0 router. So this is a specific version of the firmware of DDWRT firmware that will allow us to install that new firmware on the router. So we click on, there's 6 pieces of firmware here, and we're going to download all of them. So I click the updater, I click killer, revert, micro. This is the firmware we'll be installing, and old generic. And then there's a TFTP executable. And although we don't need it, I'm going to download it just to show you that we can download Windows executables onto a Macintosh without fear of breaking something. They won't run, but we can download them. Okay, so now we're going to take and go back to our router, 192.168.1.1. We're going to go to admin, and we're going to select firmware upgrade. Now what we're doing at this point is we're reverting back to old firmware. So to do that, we have to use that revert binary file that was provided by that sub. So there's the revert file. So how do we do that? We click on firmware upgrade, reset to default settings, choose a file on the desktop, in the downloads directory, and we click the revert file, choose it, and upgrade. Now I'm going to show you what's happening here on if you'll notice, the light is still on for the Cisco router. We've been told that the upgrade's successful and the unit is rebooting now. Please wait a moment. Now usually I wait about, you can wait from 1 to 2 minutes. If the light goes out, we can go back to the router and load the older version of the firmware. If the light doesn't go out, we may have to. So if the light goes out, we can go back to the old version of the firmware right away. We can basically use our browser to get back to here. But if it doesn't go out in approximately 2 minutes, then we can actually pull the plug on this router to get it to a point of being ready to handle. There we go. So within about 2 minutes, this will go, the light will go off. And now what we can do is we can go back to here. Now if we don't get a response from the router yet, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the plug, just pull it out for a second, plug it back in, let the router has a minimal interface. such that we should now be able to, there we go, get back to it with this minimal interface. So we choose a file. File we choose is the firmware we downloaded off the Cisco website. And we apply. So what's happening at this moment is if the application is applied properly, it will tell us that it has successfully applied this firmware. This again sometimes takes up to 2 minutes. Okay, upgrade successful. Unplug the power cord from the back of the router and plug it in. So I'm going to show you that we're doing this. I unplug, plug it back in. And now what's happening is the firmware is rebooting. So the upgrade was successful. And you'll notice the light is back on again. So we can now go back to the Linksys router. And now rather than the DDWRT firmware, we're back to the Linksys firmware, the latest version of the Linksys firmware that came with this router. Okay, so the next step you might ask is, okay, how do I upgrade to the DDWRT firmware? And the answer is in a very similar fashion to what we just did. So we click admin, we click upgrade, and now we choose a file from the download directory. And the file that we choose is, we have to first kill the Cisco provided firmware and put the router in a state where the TFTP that I talked about through the terminal program can be used. So we choose the killer and we select upgrade. And we get a little progress bar that moves along. It says the upgrade is successful, rebooting. So you can see that the light has gone out right here, saying that a minimal amount of firmware is currently running. But the power light's on solid, which means that we should be able to communicate through that LAN connection to the router, but using FTP. So the next element of all this is that we're going to launch our terminal program. We're going to move to the download directory. So we're going to do an ls to list. We're going to move to the download directory. We're going to type change directory cd downloads. I'm going to list again. There is all of our software. And now we're going to ping 192.168.1.1. We see that it's alive. We can talk to it. So command period to stop that. We type in TFTP space -E space 192.168.1.1. What we're saying is use the terminal file transfer protocol routine under terminal and talk to the Ethernet address 192.168.1.1. Okay, now we've got TFTP up and running. So we're now going to type put, and the file we're going to put is this DDWRT version 24 macro generic binary file. So I'm going to use I dragged across it, did a right mouse click, copy it to the clipboard, point down here, right mouse click, paste, and we're going to put that file on the router. Okay, in 1.76 megs was transferred in 3.7 seconds. And now the next thing we have to do is, you'll notice if I bring up the router here, that the light is not lit. So we're going to wait about a minute for this TFTP reset to take place. Now what we're going to do is we're going to do the same thing we did before. We're going to pull the power. First couple of seconds, plug it back in. That's a reset of the router. And now we're going to wait the 1 to 2 minutes until this light comes on, indicating that the router is now functioning again under, a firmware package that allows us to use its features. So while this is taking place, let's just review what we did. We've gone full circle. We've, oops, and the light's on already, so we don't have to review too long. You see the light's on. So we should now be able to continue, and it takes us to ddwrt.com. We're able to put in a username. I'll just use admin, this ADMIN, and ADMIN for the user ID and password and confirmation of password. Okay, we're taken back to the home page. Now the one thing we notice here is that the MAC address for LAN, WAN, and wireless are wrong. They're not the ones that are on the bottom. And that's because when TFTP transferred that binary file from ddwrt.com into the router, that these were the defaults that were set. So we have to reset these defaults. How do we do that? Okay, well, we go to admin, and we go